I'm going to begin this discussion this evening by asking what got you into working on the climate crisis here, and also why is it difficult to make films about the climate crisis, you think? Because, people are aware, many people are aware, increasingly aware, that there is a crisis going on. But I'm not sure that it's really made the impact on our screens that perhaps we would have wanted. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with you, Tom, on why did you think you urgently needed to take on this subject, and why do you think it's a difficult one?
Oh, I studied biology at university, and I wanted to be. I just wanted to be a biologist. I just wanted to go around and look at animals. So I didn't really want to make films about the climate crisis. I'd rather not. It's much less interesting and really depressing. But it also felt a bit mad to, for me it's the climate and nature crisis. They're interlinked, and I think one of the problems is that we put climate in its own category, which means everybody's like, oh, I'll just read the news. And then you're like, oh, some climate stuff. Okay, am I ready? Yeah, if you're in your best mood, and maybe you skip past it to the sport and the other bits. But I did it because it's the crisis of our time, and I wanted to have an impact on the natural world that was positive, and it felt like talking about climate would be a positive thing. But it is really hard. Like when I started, I guess I'm 40 this year, so I started when I was 21. The big problem back then was even trying to get my own parents to take it seriously, let alone TV commissioners. And that's changed dramatically. It's rare that you've come across somebody who would deny that it's important. But as a story, it's hard because who's the protagonist? The main character's like this invisible gas, and we all kind of are involved in making it. And as you said yourself, you've been telling these stories for 19 years. How do you tell urgent stories for 19 years while still getting people to buy that it's still urgent? Even though now it is really even more urgent. And how many stories have you seen about a crisis that were made and completed within that crisis? Like, it's really hard for a storytelling perspective. And the way I approach it is the way that lots of other people approach it, which is to make it about human stories or stories that are bound up within that. And I don't know, the first film there, that was one with Alexander Skarsgård, that was the intro is us kind of nodding at how hard it is to cut through. Hi, I'm a celebrity, I've been paid to tell you this story. Because otherwise you probably wouldn't listen to Sir Partha Dasgupta, paid for by the UK Treasury to investigate how economics and biodiversity interlink, the thing that will determine the survival of all future generations. We might just not care. So we got Skarsgård to narrate it. But, there's few tools in the box.
And you called it the answer to everything.
Yeah, that was facetious, because clearly it's not. And also there's a lot of criticism about whether you should put a value on nature. That's what the film is about. Some people quite rightly say that as soon as you start trying to put a value on it in conventional economics, we don't understand the value of natural systems. We don't even understand them at all. So we're going to be wrong. And other people say, well, if you don't put a value on it, it will be perceived as valueless, and nature's just going to be trashed in all our economic considerations, which is what's happening. So, but ultimately, it is the answer to everything. It is really important, and I encourage you all to watch it. It's 5 minutes long. Oh, thanks. Yeah, woo! Yeah. No, we're just trying to joke around. Genesis, the film, is kind of interesting. I made it with Nathan Grossman, who made I Am Greta, and he, spending time with her, got very interested in systems change, and I got really interested in, what is system change? Everyone's like, let's have system change, let's have a bit of that, but what is it? Who can enunciate it? Who can, describe it to their friends? And so when he heard of Partha, he was like, oh, I should make a film about this guy who knows about system change. But we didn't want to take any flights, because we're trying to, reduce our own impact and change our own film system. So he asked me to film it for him in the UK. And I remotely shot it, and he did some remote shooting for me. And then when we couldn't figure out how to make a film about Partha, we just met up. He took the train over and we hung out. And the film just came out of our frustration at how hard it was to tell this really important story. So the title was sort of our gasp of anguish at how important it was and how no one would take that seriously.
That's a very important point, actually. And James, have you found it difficult to get people to take this seriously?
Well, yes. And we've known about it for a long time, right? And I think as wildlife filmmakers, we we're quite sensitive to it, because things that were predictable 20 years ago maybe in animal behaviour terms aren't so much anymore. There seems more chaos in the system, there's more unexpected things happening. It all seems to be part of the same picture. It is hard. When we made Blue Planet 2, we spent more time talking about the oceans warming, climate change, ocean acidification, all the consequences of warming oceans and a warming planet. And yet it was plastics that people picked up on. And there was only 14 minutes on plastics in the entire 7 hours. So what was that about? Why did plastics resonate more strongly? And I think that's just simply because it is more tangible. You can see a plastic bag floating in the sea and imagine what you might do to stop that happening. And we didn't tell people to go out and clean beaches, but in this country alone they did, and literally hundreds of thousands of people did. It was extraordinary. And I think that is because it's just something that you can imagine a solution to. And I feel like humanity is, the goodness in humanity is you see a problem and you want to do something about it. And that led people towards direct action, which was amazing to see. Why hasn't that occurred with the climate issues that we were illustrating and that so many of us talk about a lot? And I think it's just that lack of tangibility and lack of accountability that you said. But I do believe that we can help people connect and care with these subjects, and if they are conceptual, then we have to find ways of making them more tangible. And often that's about finding characters, whether human or animal, and seeing the direct impacts these things are having on their lives, and start to make it relatable, start to help us connect and care with individuals, and then we'll start to see it through in a different way. But I think as well, one of the issues is the language. Climate change, biodiversity loss. These words, they're very conceptual as well, actually. I mean, I struggle with biodiversity, and it is related to this. And I just think how we frame it, the language we use, all these things is really important too.
Yeah, that question of language is quite key here. I mean, at The Guardian, we took a conscious decision a few years ago to stop talking about climate change and global warming, because they sounded really weak and, almost quite nice, really. People could do with a bit of global warming in the winter. But they really didn't measure up to the scale of the crisis. So we only talk now about climate crisis, climate breakdown, climate chaos, and so on, global heating. And it's hard to find ways to talk about biodiversity loss as well. Instead of talking about fish stocks now, we talk about fish populations. Rather than just seeing sort of fish as a resource, seeing it as something natural. But it's quite hard to get out of that language, and it's quite hard to put that across. Lisa, how do you get over these difficulties of communication?
Yeah, it's something that we've been exploring a lot, really. I mean, I think that ultimately with the climate crisis, it started as climate change, it became an emergency, and now we're in a crisis. That language is really good at evoking the urgency, but it also triggers a sense of doomerism, that this is out of our control, away from our fingertips. It's certainly not something that I can really do anything about, but not to use too many alliterative words, but the thing about, a perma-crisis is it is permeating. The things that are happening in the environment very quickly feed into things that intersect with your everyday culture, your everyday conversations. And so we actually have to do more to bring new language into it. And we talk about making things more tangible. I think at WaterBear, we're looking for that imagination and for ways of coming up with other ways of living, other ways of describing, other ways of resolving what might feel quite doomeristic, or doomerism. And yeah, I think it very much comes down to that imagination, and I talk about this too much, but this sense of actually it's already happening. There are other ways of living, other ways of solving. We're just not necessarily exploring and shining too much of a spotlight on people doing very innovative things or living in very different ways that actually we see a lot of fringe and marginal and sort of underrepresented movements and actions and outsiders suddenly becoming a mainstream philosophy or way of living. So if you go in through like some cultish fringe movement, and that very much quickly can turn into like an actual way of thinking of a different way of living, a different way of waking up each day. So very much accepting that a crisis is also an opportunity.
Yeah, that's and that issue of empowering people. It's quite hard to empower people in the face of what we've just seen, in the face of what we're all facing. I mean, what is the key to empowering people, do you think?
Okay, yeah, sorry.
I'm going to...
Yeah, I think the key is to meet them where they're at and give them a sense of recognition that they can see themselves and instantly perhaps start to belong there. You wouldn't talk about, we'd want to talk about racism through a football documentary. We'd want to talk about, with Broken Wings, I think we saw the end of it, but really what you're watching throughout the edit is a music video through a well-known Italian composer that starts in the forest to really get you into something that feels like something you would consume and enjoy anyway. I think we shouldn't be afraid to entertain, lowercase e, when we're trying to tell an impact story. In each of those, you're not hooked by the urgency of the message, you're really brought into it through some other emotive storytelling language that the filmmaker has taken permission on. So, entertain, lowercase e.
Thank you. Josh, I'm going to bring you in now because you called your documentary My Extinction. It's quite a striking title. How did you come up with that?
Well, it's a joke, but also not, because I guess this goes to, what's a story that pulls you in and what's one that potentially kind of keeps you out because you think, oh God, am I even going to watch this? It's going to make me feel guilty. It looks a bit worthy. It's preaching to the converted. And I already am converted, so now I just have to give up fish as well, or whatever. And all these approaches need doing, and we don't know the answers yet, so we just have to try everything. I think it's a both and thing. But the and for me that I can do is admitting that if you're going to be active, if you're going to convert your feelings into activity instead of just sitting with them and feeling bad, you might need to, or at least someone like me would need to, acknowledge that I'm a selfish git. And I grew up in a very sort of self-absorbed way in a highly consumerist culture with ambitions and ego that needs stroking and so on. And that's not going to go away, not for me. It's too late, right? I'm not going to become an altruist at this stage. I mean, there's this sort of Oscar Wilde quote, I think, about the problem with socialism is it requires too many of your evenings. He was a socialist, but the problem he had with socialism as lived at that time, and very much so now, I think, too, is it's a bit worthy. Where's the place for me? Where's the me? And so the sort of joke of My Extinction is the joke of the film, as I think you kind of saw, where I'm a little bit playing up who I am, but it's still real. It's a documentary, and I become a guilty dad who becomes a kind of climate activist more and more, and then actually become quite active in the protest movement and stuff. But that's the story of the film. But I remain self-absorbed, and I think that the guests, like the people that I'm hoping to speak to in this one, the identity position that I'm guessing, I'm hoping people to be able to see themselves a little bit. It doesn't exclusively have to be entitled overeducated white middle class males, but people in sort of adjacent to that can all sort of go, oh yeah, there is a way of getting into this stuff that is, you still get to be a filmmaker if that's what you are, yeah, but just with a slight little shift over to here, and suddenly something becomes possible. Or joining that group, an Extinction Rebellion might be too tasty for you, so it might be Friends of the Earth, or it might be the Quakers, or it might be whatever. Those are the sorts of people we're trying to bring in to help this film get out there. And if you show up to those groups, you'll meet a bunch of people who are a lot like you, and also some who really aren't like you, which is also great too. And that will be fun. And that's kind of another thing the film tries to show. So it's just we're all asking the same thing. What does change look like? How can you imagine change in a world which is so constrained, actually, even though there's so many offers all the time in the media. They all seem to sound the same, say the same thing all the time. And when you catch just wind of something that just, I don't know, what do we call that, truthiness or something that moves us or makes us laugh. My film's funny, that's one way in, I guess, and has intimacy, which is another thing. Then I think, I don't know, we have to hope that's something.
And how will you know if you've succeeded?
Well, we did one test screening. I know it went well because people laughed at the jokes, key. Because if you make, any of you make, I come from fiction originally, and so I try to bring comedy into some of the things that I do, and I'll be trying to make fiction things again. But if people don't laugh at your jokes on screen, then you're fucked. Because you know straight away, you can make a drama and people can talk about how beautiful it was, and they can have a sort of dinner party conversation afterwards, and it's all very meaningful and interesting. But with comedy, it's brutal. Either they laugh or they don't. That's it. So, so they laughed. That was a good one. And then some of these sort of NGOs and things seem to be eager to use it as a kind of recruitment tool that's a little different to other campaigning films, maybe for some of the reasons I talked about. And you can sort of bring your reticent dad or brother who sort of wants to do something but actually doesn't really, and maybe he will afterwards. That's the idea. Yeah.
Do you think people have been afraid to bring joking into this, to bring comedy into this, bring anything light to this subject? I mean, you know, Tom, you also had a sort of bit of a slightly jokey title. I mean, do you think people have been taking this too seriously in a sense?
I don't know. I mean, everybody who's involved in something terrible jokes about it as a way of dealing with it. Like you hang out with medics who have to work on A&E. They joke about awful stuff happening to people all the time. So it feels like with something that's so terrible happening to all of us as a coping mechanism, it's quite a good one. But I'm not sure that the filmmakers who get into telling stories about climate change are the best comedians necessarily. I mean, look, you've got two scientists here. Like, I mean, you tell great jokes, but like, we don't know, we're not trained in jokes, we're trained in science. When I first started, I thought it was all about making a film was like a PowerPoint with the bigger budget. And it's taken me ages to kind of learn how to do it better. But I think jokes are really good. I remember like, they just release tension. But when our film went out in the New York Times, so many of the comments were like, you can't do something lighthearted about this, it's so important. And I remember I also made a film about the sea, which had some unusual music in it, and somebody commented on that, saying, this is the wrong music for the sea. And I was like, these are really good indicators that people have been fed the same diet of films. Like, if the sea always has the same music, right? Like, so much that someone's been trained by watching it to think it's wrong. Or, like, you know, or somebody feels, I mean, I think the joking about something painful is different, because what if it's so painful for somebody that day, maybe it is right for them not to feel you can joke. But yeah, obviously, I think it needs to be everything. And I think we're always like, what's the magic bullet? What's the right way of doing it? It's just like, it just should be relevant in the films it's in. I think we're in this weird position where like some of us filmmakers go like, I'm going to make a climate change film because it's not out there enough, and we make it solely the focus of our work. We're trying to make up for the fact that all the other filmmakers are like, oh, let's not mention that in case no one watches our film. So it's kind of absent by passivity everywhere else. And I'm not sure us trying to like make up the ground by stuffing our films with loads of it is going to fix that. But comedy is a great tool, yeah.
And entertainment more broadly.
Yeah, big
exactly.
time.
So I agree with you. Entertainment. I just have a capital E actually, because to me, you've got to get people watching. You've got to get your viewers, and if we want to catalyse conversations around really important subjects, then you've got to make it easy viewing. You've got to help people in. There's got to be an entry point. There's got to be a way to connect and care and go on a journey with the audience. And you have to, I think, sometimes, you know, earn the right to talk about the really tough stuff. But I think entertainment is a really important tool for us to use.
I think it's so long as you're doing, the endeavour is there, right? So if you're unlocking a scientific corridor, if you're broadening like a literacy about something that other people otherwise wouldn't find out, if you're discovering a new solution or a new pathway, then I think you can use whatever lever you want to. Like, we're very interested in sci-fi, we're very interested in comedy too, we're very interested in you know, dance has been done to death for climate, there's something about it. But yeah, those cross genres that allow more audiences to access it and to recognise it. And actually for more platforms to go, yeah, I would like to also take your film and distribute it elsewhere. Like, a lot of what we do is think of the wider ecosystem. How far can this travel? And so if it's more than just a climate documentary, but also a music video or a sci-fi thriller, the further it will go, the more people will see it.
Yeah, good bust out of those genres. I mean, just to say one more tiny thing about humour. This might be because I, you know, grew up in a household where Holocaust jokes were a thing. But you know, so sometimes the humour, you know, the referent of the humour is very, very black and despairing. And I suppose another function adjacent to humour is just feelings in general. That, you know, one of the things that films can powerfully do which is something to do with entertainment. It's one of the reasons we go and see films, is to kind of be a holding place and a sort of cathartic place for us to have feelings. And the feelings around climate are so difficult to have that most people just don't want to have them at all. Their filter is very strong. Why would you think about the end of the world? It's too depressing. I already have to go to work, feed my kids, show up for my spouse, blah, 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 every day. And then on top of that, you're going to say all of that is just ending the world. No, thanks. So underneath that is some real hopelessness and despair that people can't even admit in. So, so not to just hit the dark registers, there are others as well, and joy too, like in, the bird film, you just think, birds, wow, joy. So, but this is the thing that film can powerfully do, and it doesn't do the PowerPoint after all, does it? But it does these other things that are just as important, so.
And we're just there to create the initiation space, right? Hopefully you watch something and you go on to then discover more and you want to know more about poaching or the other world. So if that initiation space has to feel real, entertaining, capital E, at times scary through thriller versus reality, great. It's an initiation space for me.
I mean, I think just to also I feel like if you've been doing this for a while, maybe you came into it at a time where the big problem was saying hey guys, look at this. Here's some information, and the exemplar was an inconvenient truth, which was actually literally a PowerPoint display, right? But we've got to get I don't know, there's part of my head that's probably still stuck there, and I've got to prise it loose because exactly as you put, people are not lacking for information on this topic, and documentary can deliver information, but what most people get out of documentary is emotions and people's experiences that they either give them gateway to things that they couldn't normally experience or help them make sense of things that they are. And that is, I think, where documentary is really good for climate. It doesn't need to tell you something. And this is something that I'm trying to get over myself. I was like, if I could just give people some information, things would change. And it's no, not at all. That's not how it works.
No.
That's how you make people feel, or help people feel.
Yeah.
But it is quite difficult to impart some of this information because it is a complex subject, isn't it? I mean, yours is called the answer to everything.
Which it is, absolutely, yes. It's 5 minutes long. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, how do you get that information, that necessary information across while continuing to entertain and enthrall people?
What is necessary information, though? Because that's where I get, that's a tension in my mind that is worth exploring, which is that what some people need to know, the kind of converted activists, they've got a base level, they need to know all the information. They want something informed and well researched. Other people have a sort of latent curiosity that they just don't have time for. Some people are denying, but they're confused and they know there's something wrong. They all need a different variety of what that necessary information is. So whilst I think there's definitely a need to have all the information, you're never going to get there and satisfy each audience, are you? Some people want a little bit and some people want a lot. And I think, it's the diversity that you need, essentially. But if I watch one thing about one subject, I'd then explore other formats and other documentaries about it. So I'd nourish and be accountable for my own information.
Yeah. James, you were at the BBC, and was climate change seen as a controversial subject, one that required balance from climate skeptics?
Well, it was at one point, wasn't it? Because I remember all the debate about that on Radio 4, and then they decided it didn't need such balance anymore because it was scientifically irrefutable.
Yeah.
But I'm not speaking on behalf of the BBC any more, so I can't really talk about that too much, I suppose. But I mean, definitely things have moved on, and I think the new science that's coming out is scary. There was a new UN report came out last week, and they're talking about overshoot, which is where we go past the 1.5, and what that might mean, and what tipping points there could be beyond that we don't even know what unintended consequences might happen. The science is really very much there, and I think it's just becoming still a political issue, and it's still so much of a political issue. And I think that's that's the journey that you will have seen over 20 years is just the science becoming more and more irrefutable. There's no need for balance in that debate anymore, because the vast consensus of scientific opinion agrees about the big picture. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't know about in the small picture. What does it mean for tundra, or what does it mean for ocean current, or what's going to happen next? But you know, there's a trajectory, and then we'll keep going on that journey. But I think the science is there, so it's about politics now.
And yet, although the science is irrefutable and that should no longer be controversial, yet people still continually get abused and attacked for talking about climate science. I mean, you know, online, you'll kind of all kinds of sort of climate trolls will crawl out as soon as you say anything. Have you experienced that, Lisa?
Well, to some degree, we've got a really nice pot of money to make film. We work with lots of philanthropists and NGOs and impact VCs, etc. And they're all good people, but they all have their own agenda. So we have a nice pot of money around circularity and regenerative lifestyle. Then we have an interesting set of funding money around carbon extraction and storage, and both of them see each other as the enemy. So I guess we get to have the privilege to just ask ourselves, the point is just to create literacy and awareness around these things, and let's initiate both spaces. Like, there is a massive lack of understanding about both. But what we probably won't do is create formats that try and seek truth and finite, conclusions around which one works, because ultimately they're all bets. So we try and hopefully, what the good thing is that we get to make both rather than the bad thing is. But we are often balancing that with where our funding might come from and how we might create funding models around that with filmmakers and protect the independence as well.
Yeah.
Have
you? Yeah, Josh.
I mean, I haven't been sort of personally attacked by kind of the oil lobby or anything like that. Maybe someone else here has, but I do think we are, kind of involved in a culture war, whether we like it or not. Yeah. And the other side, if you like, unless there are some of you here, in which case let's talk. But I've sat down and had tea with some of the other side, like the IEA, the Institute for Economic Affairs, who are a kind of hard right think tank. Who are, anyway, to cut a long story short, we are in that, and they are very well funded, very, very clever, and very good at propaganda. And they operate at a very high level of government. And I think it's just really worth saying that there's a revolving door between the government, the right-wing press. On the board of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which is Nigel Lawson's essentially climate denial group, which is oil-funded, even though he denied it. It's now been proven that it is oil-funded. You've got the editor of the Telegraph. You've got MPs like Steve Baker. You've got other people who are high-level SPADs and advisors to government, based in Tufton Street. I mean, this is real, and even more so in the States. So that's what we're up against, and they really know how to spin, those guys, and they really know how to undermine. So this is an identity. This is a struggle for identities. It's not a struggle for facts. We know what the facts are. It's just what do other people want to do with those facts, or how to deny those facts. And so I think it is, important to, I suppose, depending on the kind of programming you'll make, maybe it's not the foreground question, but it is a question. And so you're trying to, as you said, I think, form identities or opportunities to sort of be a certain kind of person that maybe just slightly spreads where that's at the moment, because it is a bubble. And, probably most of the people in this room are to some degree in that bubble and are probably quite aware of that problem. And I just wonder, how does one fight that a little bit? Maybe you can't always, but...
Yeah. I don't think as filmmakers you often get much trolling. I think as your subjects get trolled. So I've made films with Greta and with George Monbiot, and man, the trolling those guys get. Oh, yeah. You see it, and when you see it coming in like real time, and then when you feel responsible for how they're going to be perceived if like you film them and you edit it and you think, oh God, like I made a film with the two of them and I put a shot in it and I thought it was like a coal power station, and it was a nuclear power station chimney from space. And I got like, my only ever trolling at that point was like this professor of atomic physics who was like, what is Greta's secret agenda anti-nuclear? And I was like, I'm terribly sorry, that was me. I was mistaken the edit. And then he was really polite. He was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that. So it was like a really nice bit. I mean, I'm not saying like we go on holiday together now or anything, but I felt very lucky not to be public facing because it's terrifying. And I asked George about it, and I was like, how do you deal with this? I'd be crushed by, 10 minutes of the messages you receive. And he's like, I don't care, I only care when they're wrong. And then I changed my mind, and I was like, I cannot relate to that at all. So I'm very glad not to be in that place. But it's interesting watching, we learn by example. and you learn how you should do things by watching people you admire dealing with difficult situations. And it has been very interesting to watch people deal with those situations, to see their sort of steeliness and resolve, and just thinking, okay, well, if it comes down to it, I guess I'll have to do that too, if you put your words in a more public place that they can be associated with your face.
Yeah.
How do you find it? You're probably the person in this situation who faces it the most.
Mm.
It's true.
Oh, you just try to ignore it, really, or laugh at it. But yeah, I mean, you get, I get quite a lot of abuse, kind of online and so on, and it's unpleasant. Yeah, and it does. I think it does have a sort of impact, even if you try to pretend to yourself that it doesn't. Do you think it puts off commissioners or people who might otherwise be more open to climate films?
I think we resolve that in our minds by seeking to commission films where there's either like lived experience or learned experience, so that there's a sense of no one else can take that story from that person. And I think that's where something that we touched on, like, I think we don't really use the word documentary much at WaterBear. We use the word storytelling more, because it does evoke, I mean, hopefully it doesn't evoke like a lack of truth and expertise behind it, but it's more that we want that filmmaker to be empowered via their own experience of that subject or that space that they've spent 10 years embedded in, or whatever it might be, even if it's in their own mind. So we sort of managed to get away from fearing commissioning something that feels big and meaty, because we make sure that the person who's behind it is already activistic in that space, or embedded or invested, and has a natural connection to that inquiry. They can't be questioned as an expert or an authority or somebody who has permission to tell that angle.
Excellent. And how do you go about getting getting commissions, getting people interested, getting the kind of impact behind a climate project? James, how do you begin?
Well, we tend to tell quite big global stories at the moment, that sort of planet Earth, blue planety scale thing, and it's just part of the story, and our brief to our crews is go out there and tell it how it is, and I don't think any commissioner would not want it like that. Mm-hmm. But we also know that we are storytellers, that we want to enthrall and entertain, and then we can get involved with the education side of it as well. But it's a sophisticated and complex sort of storytelling job, if you like. And we want to elicit a really broad range of emotions in the viewers, so that you come out of it feeling like you've just watched a drama. That's the idea. And if you're promising that sort of emotional response to a commissioner, again, I'm sure they would be interested in it. But we have to be really inventive, and we can't just bang the same old drum. And if we make something feel too doom-laden, then there's a chance that we as people will sort of do the ostrich response, put our heads in the sand. So we have to be mindful of where there are hopeful stories, where there is change. I believe that there is still time. We need to act now. That's our sort of message. But therefore, hopeful messaging is really important. And when done well, hopeful messaging is inspiring. So again, that would be attractive.
I think hopeful messaging actually sometimes gets even more criticism than any other form of messaging on climate change, though. People say, you're just giving people hopium. And that's unrealistic. I mean, how do you answer that? Tom, do you want to?
I've never tried hopium myself. Wouldn't recommend.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever accused me of being too hopeful in my films, sadly. Maybe I should try and be. I don't know. That seems. I just think that maybe that's just a symptom of there not being one film for everybody, because everybody's at such different stages with this and comes from such a different background.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with like biodiversity loss. Like there's always been in the wildlife film world this like a lot of like hand wringing of like what is the best proportion of scary stuff that's for a film. How much should we talk about this? You know, how hopeful should it be? And obviously, like, there's no magic bullet. I think that comes from just us wanting to know what we should do. But sadly, the truth being, we should respond to a changing situation in a way that feels right for each of us.
Yeah. I was reading about a new phrase, changeable optimism or flexible optimism, where actually we don't want to be too hopeful because it sort of then goes the other way, where you're like, okay, everything's okay. But then you're constantly readdressing what the benchmark of hopefulness and optimism could be, and being very flexible about what certainly how I look at circularity versus carbon extraction is just that both might have a solution. I'm just going to keep exploring both of them and being flexible around it versus trying to find an answer.
And how many films are just optimistic or just pessimistic outside of this debate? How often do you think people making a documentary or like any other film about a topic would be like, is it exactly optimistic or pessimistic? Like, it's such a peculiar thing. And I think that's because we're a genre, you know, or either wildlife or climate, we're a genre. And I think, I don't want to be a climate change filmmaker. I want to be a filmmaker that happens to have climate in it when it should be.
Exactly.
Our audiences are really sophisticated and require a broad range of programming as well. That's the other thing. So you have to do things in different ways, and you know, a hopeful story will be more appropriate in one film than another. But it's all about, you know, the show you're making. I think what's important is that we're really creative, really entertaining, that we come up with fresh and new ways to tell these stories, because we all respond well to novelty. You know, and that we draw people in and help them care, and that we reach them on that emotional level. These are the tools we have at our disposal as storytellers.
I just think, talking about this commissioning from the sort of supply rather than the demand side, kind of, you know, there are gatekeepers, cultural, public, private gatekeepers, you know, who commission films or can commission films or put films into development and shows and broadcasts. And as you're saying, who wants to be a climate filmmaker? You just want to be a filmmaker who also happens to make films about one of the key things that's happening in our existence. And, you know, there is a bit of a danger of a sort of siloing there in terms of commissioning structures and so on. You know, I've sort of felt for a while now, you know, if we think this is an emergency, which clearly it is, then surely could one not have a climate lead in any sort of medium to large, you know, broadcaster or commissioner, or, you know, instead of a, you know, in the same ways you have a diversity and inclusion officer, you know, where's the climate officer?
We do, actually.
You guys do, because you are completely climate facing. But if you're the BBC, or if you're, you know, a big Hollywood film company, or where's the climate person who's in on every meeting saying, so what's the climate angle on this? Till everyone's sick of hearing it. But actually, well, maybe there is one. Oh, actually, but this doesn't seem to be to do with that. Yeah, but if we just did this and normalised this aspect of storytelling and kept climate, then, you know, because actually it's pitiful. You know, I come from fiction first before documentary. The number of shows, telly shows, mainstream movies, or even small independent movies that are dealing with climate, let alone head on, just even tangentially. It's on one hand you can number them. It's Don't Look Up. Now there's one about the pipeline, a couple of others, that's it. Wow, that is not a world in emergency. You wouldn't think that was a world in emergency. So it's really quite pitiful on that side of things. And the bottlenecks are quite clear. You know, any of you who work in, you know, these big organisations, you know, you should be rooting for a climate lead job. Even if it's 2 days a week, someone should come in.
They've got fancy names, impact producers, so they tend to bundle it under impact.
Yeah,
essentially.
Or corporate ethics and responsibility, sustainability, those jobs. I mean, it's got to be more than we need to, you know, it can't only be, look at our production, it's carbon neutral, or we use less paper towels this year, or whatever. That's fine. But what it really needs to be is you need to tell the stories, because the real power you have as people who tell stories is to tell those stories in one way or another. You know, find the story that works for the average EastEnder viewer, or in EastEnders, get the climate story into EastEnders, which, by the way, they have. But, you know, just keep doing that all the time, instead of just thinking, oh, well, we'll sort of try and do that if we can. It's like, no, it's an emergency. So why isn't that given a job title, you know?
It's true.
Or Exiles should just go and picket the houses of the commissioners rather than the BBC instead.
See you there.
Just make them, people who make decisions, feel a bit scrutinised for it. But as I say that, I think that's really stupid, actually, because I don't think you can just bully people into finding things more interesting than they already do. And I think, like, one of the things that we're guilty of is we over-intellectualise this. We try and, like, think our way through this, like, and And I don't know, I don't watch that many climate films. Do
No.
you guys?
They're boring.
Even if you want to make them, do you watch them? Like, if something's up there and it's like an important film, I'm like, yeah, no thanks. I've had enough of that.
I have to say, I think most filmmakers, especially the sort of emerging generation, they've already got purpose quite near the centre of their work. People don't just make, some people just make films for the craft of it, for the love of it, but there's always some kind of, with the ones that I'm interested in, but which I see everywhere anyway, it's just me, but there's always some core, which is like, well, what's the message, what's the purpose? And I think that's a very small gap to get them to, well, what's the impact objective? Like, what behavioural shift or what mind shift are you trying to bend with this docu-sci-fi or comedy? And I think you can put an impact objective on multiple genres. It's not just a climate film, which is, I think, what we're all getting at.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes it can be so led by impact that it becomes boring.
Well, exactly,
Like,
which is where you pull it back. I mean,
because there's such a tension, because if you really care, because the opposite is like if you make a film and you're like, well, let's just like some content, let's throw it out there, let's hopefully people watch it, and you haven't thought about what impact it might have and how you can help it have that impact, then it's a missed opportunity. But if you're so led by impact that everything else, it's like I think it's like the tail wagging the dog. It's like signposting a million miles off. This is a film that tries to make you do something that someone else thinks you should do, and that's
well,
like.
it doesn't need to be all the way through, though. Either it
Yeah.
can just be that epiphanous, it might be a made-up word, a moment of epiphany in a particular beat of the particular moment which you didn't expect. I mean, that's what's important. Is it doesn't have to be. It's not only an impact film if it has impact in every beat, with every character, with every scene.
But it also could be things just like normal, like, you know, if you have a diversity and inclusion officer in a company, you know, it's about hires and it's about the content that you're producing and it's about normalizing things. They don't have to be climate stories. They can just reflect the fact that we live in a world where climate is the thing and it's having all kinds of impacts, local impacts, you know, media impacts, you know, human impacts, feeling impacts.
And we could have built a big impact department in our company. What we decide, we've got a good number of impact specialists, but the challenge we've given to everyone that works at WaterBear is that we all need to be impact literate, and it's not something that you. Hopefully, I think the next thing is that everybody's got it running through their veins, and it's not this like specialist thing in the first place. Anyway.
Yeah.
It can feel a bit like trying to make children eat broccoli.
Yeah.
Can't it?
A baby.
That's the title of a great climate film.
Yeah. How to eat.
Why we're all doomed because it's too boring. Like,
Well, that's true. I'm going to open this up to questions from the audience now. I think we've got have we got something, some way of, here. I saw this person's hand go up first here, and then we've got a question here, and then we've got questions here. I say questions, they don't have to be questions. You can just, you know, tell us your thoughts.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your enlightening chat tonight. In terms of the message getting across, I think I always get a bit like there's overkill. But the interesting thing is I saw a documentary which has been on Netflix recently with Woody Harrelson called Kiss the Ground, which looks at the potential for the ground, what's under the ground rather than what's up above. So I'm just curious to know, when you're trying to look at different subjects, I mean, maybe looking at it in a different direction, like rather than have these images of the Antarctic, the cliffs falling apart and stuff, do you feel that, are you always looking for something a little different in terms of perspective? Because my biggest issue with environmental stuff is I feel I'm aware of it and I appreciate it and I acknowledge that the world's going a bit some way, but I feel there's a bit of overkill. I mean, is that something you're concerned with when you're commissioning stuff?
Thank you. I'll let you answer a few questions at a time in a moment. We had a question from the lady in front here.
Hi, we've spoken a lot today about systems change, and I'm interested in the phenomenon of whiteness as a system inextricably linked to how we got here, but also one that affects those in the global south who will more so be impacted by the climate crisis. So I wanted to ask if you're considering the issue of whiteness in storytelling and systems change around climate justice, and if you have any solutions for the documentary industry prioritizing its decentralizing as an ideology. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. We had one here, and then I'll take you next. I'll take these ones next. So we've got one here.
Hello, thanks. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks, everyone. A question sort of mostly for Lisa. At the beginning, when you were introduced, you talked about turning viewers into doers, which is a fascinating idea. Now, obviously, WaterBear is an online platform, not a television station. Maybe you could talk about turning viewers into doers is something which is easier if you're an online platform rather than a television station. And just a bit of context, I'm involved with a sort of interactive film-based climate workshop that's done by University of the Arts London. And it's kind of about 40% video and film and about 60% conversations. And one thing that we find very strongly, especially from young people, not just in the UK, but around the world, is that they love to be able to talk back, not just absorb video as a kind of one direction. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit, and if anyone else wants to talk about it, it's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get Lisa to answer that in a moment. I'll take one more question in this batch, and then everyone can have a chance to answer. I think we had a question up here from the lady there in the brown jumper, and I'll take yours next in the next batch. But this lady had her hand up from the beginning. Yeah. The lady with glasses there. She's had her hand up from the beginning. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the panel. It's been really wonderful to hear all your different perspectives. I suppose I've been thinking about this for a fair old while, and in fact we're running an event on June the 7th, the Edinburgh TV Festival at the Barbican. It's Climate Content Summit, so we're exploring this in throughout the genres. But with Chris Stark, who's the lead of the Committee for Climate Change, then, and with the Climate Act of 2008, as the UK is unique in the sense that it has a legal requirement for us to, in 3 decades, get to net zero, 2050. And so I guess what I'm wondering, and you did touch upon it, Lisa, with the idea of impact, is, and I think this is a big part of why commissioning maybe is difficult, is predicting what people need to look like, what the social license actually, what are we saying? What are you saying? Because we're no longer trying to outline the problem. What is it going to look like for people across all these different, what's the world, what are the values? What, in a sense, it's like, what's important to people if it's not getting on an aeroplane and buying a big house? And so those are the kind of conversations that commissioners, this is a huge, this transformation of society that is expected of us is so massive as an education piece. It's almost, commissioners, how can you expect them to know what to commission 3 years in advance over a title? And what's the education piece? What's the systemic piece of having it like diversity, where you actually have an officer it has to be taken really seriously, not just through storytelling, but just infrastructurally. So I'd love somebody to talk to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Lisa, I'm going to take you first because we had a very specific question to you. And carry on.
I was very interested in the question from the front row as well, but and it relates to what was just asked. But so WaterBear does use storytelling as a vehicle for action, but as we know that's like very nice sounding words. How we do it is actually, it started off our platform. We've built a coalition of like over 150 NGOs, a proper coalition where we share knowledge and distill what impact movements we're driving each year, and what the themes are around them and how they intersect. And we kind of have an editorial programming calendar which kind of draws all of that community together and all of that knowledge, and work out some sort of like set of North Stars, even though there's only one North Star, maybe a set of stars that we want to hit with the funding crossovers that we see from ourselves, but also from other investors in WaterBear. And so we create that coalition, and what it means as a platform experience is that when you watch a film about X animals, you then are immediately prompted to follow and join and connect with the NGOs that are associated with that, who've helped with the research, who've, if the filmmaker wants, embedded even further in it. But then you can also connect with other users, that you can build a profile so that there's a sense of belonging on that platform, because I think the thing that gets in the way is not feeling like you can connect with the issue, not feeling like you have other people to talk about it with. So it's that sense of being able to take an action. It's not necessarily always about being able to plant more trees or immediately pledging, you know, the last pennies in your bank account, whatever it might be, but it's creating more of a profile that you can see every time you come onto WaterBear, that where you're understanding who you are and what you're interested in and what you're being initiated in, and as well as all the other people there as well. I think for me, we talk about behaviour, but actually behavioural change, action change, but it always has to start with the knowledge and the mindset and the thinking things through and the discovery that happens. And that's where I think we have the biggest work to do in order to get people into that active mindset. But yeah, I think we're there to initiate that sense of who am I as a climate activist, because most people don't want to identify as one. Most people, we've played with so many words, like we'll take you from warrior to wanderer to warrior with an A. But you know, not everyone wants to be a warrior. So this sense of helping people understand their climate identity and then connecting into those NGOs and people that we work with. But a quick one to your question is that we have an entire funding stream looking at exactly your subject. We're exploring the different types of language, but yeah, stories from the global south, which is unfortunately sort of a trendy term. But actually what it means is really working with the lived experiences and the filmmakers who have embedded there, or are actually from there, thankfully, to tell stories that directly look at the issues that most affect the climate inequality you're talking about, because often it's told, but it's told by the wrong people. But that's because we have a coalition of NGOs and that responsibility under our belt. Sorry, that was very rambling, but yeah.
No, that was brilliant. There was a lot of questions that were you or, you know, had an element of you in them. So that was really great. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Would any of our other panellists like to come in on those issues? Because I'm going to take some more questions in a moment, but I want to give you a chance to. James,
well, to your question in the front, I would say that the authenticity of local voice is really important, and helping get that out feels really important to us. So we actually help sort of set up offices and develop people's communication skills and TV documentary experience in some of the countries that you might consider the global south, whether it's Chile or Indonesia. And I think that's really important because, again, if we're trying to tell a story of a place, like we did with President Obama in the Park series, it has to be authentic. It has to be the story told from the people who know it best. So, you know, it's something that we're certainly trying to address and move on with.
Thank you.
I think there's some really interlinked points in there as well, and I think there's an interesting link between who gets to tell a story and if it's the same people who've been in a position of power to tell those stories for a long time, and whether the visual language is all the same in your stories and you're saying the same stuff. It's that if one of the big contradictions of our work is that we're united in a cause, but we're actually competitors competing against each other for funding and awards and audiences. And what happens then is that people with power and connections win. And that isn't good overall for the progress that we all care about and the reason that many of us got into this, which is to try and, you know, solve these systemic problems fairly. And I think as a producer-director, like, there are a few things you can do if you become, like, my background's wildlife, like, and so I'm very aware that there are many other people called Tom wearing similar clothes from similar schools with similar faces. And I wondered whether that was why I found my own wildlife film industry not that exciting. You know, there weren't that many different things to watch. I was like, oh, I think I know what this is going to be like. The diversity of filmmakers leads to a diversity of stories. So how do you bring that change about? And and you can do mentoring, and you can make sure that the subjects of your film are from different backgrounds, and you can make sure gradually that the people involved in the filmmaking are all from different backgrounds. But I think at its heart, that's a slow way of doing it, and as directors, it's really hard to do that. And I just wish, I remember meeting this guy once who was a filmmaker, and he won an Academy Award, and he was in his 90s and was in a train, and I said, what was the best part of your career? And he said, it was when I was in World War II. We were all drafted into this unit together, and we had to make educational films to help people win the war and survive the war, and it was the best time of my life because we was all of us working on this thing together. And I feel so sad that we're forced to compete with each other on this. It feels like anathema to the reason we're doing it. And I think that links into who ends up getting to benefit from these things and who ends up getting to do them. And then it makes, anyway, I think they're all interlinked, these things.
It's a sort of slightly different answer to the same problem. I mean, we're all making content, and it's sort of at war with, and so then everything looks like and feels like content because it is all, part of a sort of capitalized structure of, the entertainment industries, and that's a shame. But then there's community, and so this sort of idea of community building that's come up a few times, I think, in different things people are saying, and I only know my little way into that, which is, with indie theatrical documentaries, people have to show up to a cinema at some point and actually be in a physical space, which is harder, but also different to how it's ever been, perhaps more meaningful after COVID than it's been. And so, you tour a film like our film around 50 sites in the UK, and you try to get a panel of activists and artists and whatever to show up to everyone. Maybe I go to some of them, or a producer does, or whatever, and then there's a discussion. But even then, you're still in this model where you're in audience mode, and we're sort of heroes who are active and participatory. And of course, we don't really want that. We want you to be. So, if this was my panel, which it isn't, so I'm not going to hijack your panel, Fiona, but if I did, I might get you to all start talking to each other now for 5 minutes to somebody you've never met before to your left, and you would hate it. Yeah. You would hate me for making you do it. But I promise you would emerge from that screening thinking, okay, I can talk to other people, and I do have the same feelings as that person who's totally different to me sitting there, who also came. And then something might happen offline that isn't just consuming these sort of little boxes of cultural product. I think that's really, how do you get offline? I think it's a real question we can't answer today. Sorry.
No, that's brilliant. I love that answer.
Just quickly on the nitty gritty though, I think, for example, we've got a pot of money to make a film, any film about period poverty, because it's just the cause du jour in someone who's a good person's mind. And there are just so many, before I joined, there was an RFP already out, and there were just so many films, treatments that were really nice treatments about periods that were very much about, well, I'm a woman, a lot of them are female filmmakers, great. I'm a woman and all women are the same, and, we're going to tell this great story about what it is to be the cycle. But actually the real issue with it all was that we need, nobody, just because we're all connected by the same bits and pieces and we all go through periods, and that doesn't mean we know what it's like to be a girl growing up in often the global south, who has her whole sort of education and her whole girlhood stolen from her by a lack of sanitation products. Anyway, I am now rambling. But the point is, it was so easy. It would have been so easy to make one of these number of films from really great filmmakers with great ideas. But we are deciding that the only way we're going to tell the story is through somebody who actually understands the girlhood of being a girl, growing up in where period poverty is an issue. Not like pat on the back, but the point is, it is so much. It's tempting to take shortcuts, but the point is not to. Hopefully.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm going to take. I promised some other people to answer their questions now, so we've got a few minutes left. So I'm going to take. There's a gentleman at the back who's had his hand up for ages. Where's the microphone? Yep, lovely. And then we'll take these two here, and you, there.
Thank you. Very interesting panel. I'd love to know what the panel thought of the BBC's Big Oil versus the World. Josh did mention the unholy trinity of government, right-wing press, Tufton Street, fuel lobby. seems to me that there's not enough about the one cabal that is really stopping climate change. And there's a bit too much about how awful it's going to be, because it is going to be awful. And we need to focus on the enemy. If you're going to get rid of an enemy, you've got to focus on them.
Okay, thank you. Warlike talk there. We've got 2 questions here. We could get the microphone here, please. Thank you.
Thank you. We're from Green New Deal Rising, which is a movement campaigning for the solutions, but also focusing on kind of political power and electoralism. And I suppose my question is linked to the previous question, which is thinking a bit about the baddies in this narrative. And I think there's been a good shift, I would say, towards kind of corporate power and thinking about the impact of that on these issues and the stories we can tell around it. But I was interested in your perspective on whether you feel there's been enough focus on political power and specifically political ideologies that have captured and kind of stop narratives of truth being told. I mean, at the moment we're enthralled to a Conservative Party that is ideologically opposed, I would say, to the kind of action at the speed scale required with justice at its heart. And I think it's quite interesting how difficult it is sometimes to say that in artistic spaces, how difficult it is to see that represented. And I'm just interested, because I think if you think about the history of change, there have been some amazing films, Pride, It's a Sin, talking about solidarity, looking at movements that stood up to the political powers of those times to kind of make a change. And it feels like that is a slightly underdeveloped conversation and story. I'd just be super interested to hear if that's your perspective as well. I mean, I'm coming at it from an activist perspective rather than a filmmaking perspective. So, yeah, be interested to hear.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We've got a question there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Cassie from SA People. Thank you. I just wanted to hear how you frame and what kind of language you use and change when you're directing your climate stories to different generations, and whether when you're developing and creating these stories, you're thinking of attracting the largest audience, or whether sometimes you have to focus on a younger generation, a middle-aged generation, where the most sway, power, and ability to drive change is, and to entertain, obviously.
Thank you. That's a very interesting issue. We had a question. Whoops. Sorry, we had a question up here.
Thanks, everyone, for the panel so far. I'm interested. I'm a filmmaker. My business partner here, we're making a couple of projects where this is very much one of the main narratives. But we haven't talked at all in this whole discussion about unscientific narratives. So, I mean, I'm quite lucky in the sense that my wife at the moment is studying how the art world is dealing with the communication of this environmental crisis. Okay, so this is a branch of art as far as I'm concerned, documentary as well. And we can't convert the unconvertible, so let's forget them. People like my father, the sort of Gamini daily, I mean, just there's no point. They don't want to believe it, so they won't. So the people who are interested in change and could change their behavior, there's another route, which is not through data-driven scientific conversations, which is a spiritual conversation or a holistic conversation. It doesn't have to be religious, but just basically, there's a philosopher, I won't mention him, but because I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically, he's formed the basis of this essay my wife's just written, which is brilliant. And he is basically saying we need to stop talking about, most people will identify better with an idea of being connected to the earth in a sort of, like a oneness kind of connectivity conversation, rather than the temperature's going up by this point of a degree per annum. And actually, it's just interesting to me that, this isn't a criticism, but this hasn't been mentioned at all. It's very science-led, the narrative around climate change. And actually, I've made films with Aboriginal UN elders and things like that. I mean, to them, it's not a scientific conversation. This is just, at our core, it's Mother Earth. We call it Mother Earth Day. It's Father, the Son, and Mother Earth, and it's everything. It's not a scientific conversation. It's a lifestyle, it's a religious, it's a spiritual, it's a holistic conversation. And I think that is possibly a way of reaching people, is through the feels of that rather than through
Thank you.
data.
We do, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that contribution. I'm going to take our panellists in order this way, coming towards me, to give their final thoughts on those questions very quickly, because we haven't got a lot of time left. So, Josh, we had this. Actually, I'm going to give you a specific question. I'm going to ask you this question about the how do we speak to different generations?
Oh God, I have no idea
about this.
Come on! So sorry. I don't know how to speak my own generation. I'm going to communicate as terror and despair. So no, I don't talk to me.
You're speaking to other yous, which is great.
Other me's.
Yeah.
That's like I don't. Yeah, that's a Fran Lebowitz thing. You know, like why should I be interested in young people? Like they've got all this great stuff going. So I wish I could communicate to anyone. I'm unclear whether I could communicate to anyone other than myself even then. So I'm not sure about that. But I do think if I could answer the sort of two political questions a tiny bit, just the politics. You know, we are kind of absent the Ken Loach of climate. And I do wonder why that is, whether those traditions of kind of committed political filmmaking have died a bit in this country, which is a shame. But we're also kind of, absent really good thrillers about how evil the baddies are, and they really are evil. If you're a climate activist, you will be tracked as if you were a terrorist by the by the secret services of this country. That's just a thing they seem to have a budget for, right? They've probably got a file on you. I mean, they do have a file on you. They probably don't take you or me or any of us very seriously, but still, they are commanded to do so. And so, there's a thriller there waiting to be written, Touch of Evil, kind of. So I just think there are so many great climate stories that could touch on these politics in all kinds of ways and registers and speeds. Yeah. And again, why aren't they being? It should be, So I just, please, more commissioners in the audience, listen.
Definitely. I think we can all agree on that. Lisa, I'll come to you.
I think it answers two questions a little bit, but there's so much to be said, is that we definitely do what you were talking about in terms of looking outside of data-driven or science-driven stories. We just haven't had the time to go into that. But to begin with, we look at the audience, and we've done some sort of like archetype sort of profiling where we have cohorts that are called things like mindful headiness or lost wanderers, who are basically people who watch Love Island and suddenly worried about fast fashion. But we've really mapped, which is important. Where's their climate story? No, I mean it. I sound sarcastic. Really. Or we look at the experimental nomads, who possibly you. I'm not sure yet. Yeah. Still getting to know. But they're like more sophisticated. They're looking for alternative guidance. They will only want to understand external healing if they feel a sense of internal healing. So we're looking at all of that and very much building sort of propositions around it that mean that we're not just looking at, truth and transparency, data-driven science, climate science, for the very reason to capture those types of audiences. But there's a whole 400-page deck on it, which I won't go into.
Thank you. Thank you very much. James, your final word.
I guess I think the science is clear, so really it's down to us to be as creative as we can in the breadth of our storytelling, to engage with as many different audiences in as many different ways as possible, and to catalyse the conversations around this. And by doing that, we're doing something that is useful. And my own experience from looking back at Blue Planet 2 is that if you tell people these stories, viewers respond really strongly and positively to it, and it's really up to us as filmmakers to engage people powerfully enough to try and help that happen. So I look forward to hearing more about your films, and I think the breadth of storytelling that we need to create is actually really important, and it's not about the didactic science, it's about the emotions we stir in people's minds when we talk about this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Tom, your final word, 30 seconds.
30 seconds?
Go on, then.
God. I just came back from a shoot on an environmental thing, and all I could tell my co-director was how I cried when I was filming it. Not out of some worthiness, because what the person I was filming told me was such a beautiful story. And, Wilkie Collins' famous phrase, make him laugh, make him cry, make him wait. That applies to climate too. But
except we can't wait.
Can't wait.
No, we've been waiting. We've been doing it 20 years. We're all going to be alive if we survive to still be talking about climate. But I guess, I don't know. No one knows. I'd love to watch the film about the last gammon, the last guy who all of his friends have decided they all actually do believe in climate change because their grandchildren told them about it, and he's just holding out. I would love to watch that film, or like the Behind the Bastards of, like, you know, like the House of Assad, but for climate deniers. You know, I'd be so much more interested in that than another film about activists. Like, you know.
Excellent. Well, let's hope
House
someone
of
in the
Gammon.
audience tonight is going to make that film. That would be perfect. That would be fantastic. Thank you all very much.